Up next, we're going to be looking at remote controls, and these are incredibly useful for anyone who has a MIDI controller that's already hardwired to work with Bitwig Studio, or that you can create your own script for. And if you have 8 knobs, this is really efficient because what you can actually do now is every single Bitwig device has some of these remote controls already saved into it. And so it's really easy to pretty much close down the device. And if you have those automatically mapped out, you can just start to turn parameters and adjust the sound really easily. In addition, you can go in and kind of make your own. So what's the difference between remote controls and between macros? Well, with macros, you could go to multiple locations. So I could have one knob controlling both the level of this sub, and also I could have it controlling the level of the 22nd or of the 19th. Now I can't do that. I have to choose each one of these individually, and also the range is all the way. All right, so the minute you set that up, it's going to give you the full range, which may or may not be something that you're fond of depending on the control that you have. But if you're working with a controller and you get really efficient with that controller, it would be very easy to close down everything and just work from the remote controls page, and you'll even get a feel for, how far you need to turn things on if it's an EQ or something like that. If you want to go in and adjust things, you can just click on this little wrench here, and you can see that we can add multiple pages per device, and I've deleted some of the pages that were here so I could show you an example. So currently we have a remote control page to control the relative level of the bars from the sub up to the 19th. But I could go in here and I could create what they call page 2, and let's call this common. Okay, and so with this one, I want it to control the first of all the device on or off, which I can set up. It's going to give me a knob. I want to control the algorithm here for what sort of harmonics are being generated with the bars. It's almost as if you're changing the shape of the lip on the actual organ pipe itself. Going to go in here and I'm going to choose my attack and also my release. Okay, and for me, these would be sort of the common parameters I'd want control over. So now I can hit save and apply. And now when I close out of this, you can see that I'll easily be able to flip between these 2 pages. And again, depending on the MIDI controller you have, a lot of them will have something that's mapped to this arrow section here. So now I could go and change this to pure and add some release. In addition, you have the ability to save remote control pages for presets. All right, and let's look at this because this is pretty cool. This can include then plugins that you bring on, whether those are built-in devices from Bitwig or third party. I'll show you third party just so we can see it. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to grab this and put it into my effect. And now what I want to do is I'm going to go back to our editing page here, and for preset pages, I'm going to create something for this preset. All right, so I'm going to go in here and I want it to have control over, again, the algorithm that's used, the release time I definitely want, and then I want my 2 reverb controls. Okay, so the reverb character and then the reverb mix. All right, so we have that set up. So when I close this out, you can see that here in the perform page, and now when I go and I save this preset, let's call it Sexy Organ, and hit OK, I'm going to delete this, and now we're going to come in here to our presets and choose Sexy Organ. Oh, I wonder if I created that one. Oh no, somebody else did. So yeah, it's just a common adjective to use. Sexy Organ, I bring that in, our perform page comes in, the plugin has already been brought in like so, and we can just start working with it like that. So this is a really cool feature. We will be doing individual videos on all of the modulators in the coming weeks for now, let's just talk about the modulation scheme and how it compares to the remote controls. For every device that you bring in, you are going to be given an option to bring on modulators. So it defaults to 3. Once you use up those 3 slots, it gives you 3 new slots, 3 new slots, 3 new slots, etc. So you're not just limited to 3. You could really have quite a large number, but in most cases, you're never going to need more than 6. I can find it hard to believe that you'd want to have more than 6 modulators unless you have a really complicated instrument. And remember that the signal flow here is all working the same way. So with the remote controls, because I have an effect bundled into the instrument, I can use these remote controls on anything in the bundle. With the reverb here, if I was to go and create a device page, I would only be allowed to control things inside of that device itself. I can't go back and control things from the organ. All right, but the same thing is going to be true with the modulation slots. So if I had, this in a group and I had a stacked instrument, I could either use the remote controls to control anything in that signal flow, or I could use the modulators to control anything in that signal flow. That's just something to be made aware of right from the start. Hasn't changed from Bitwig Studio 1 in any way. But let's close down the remote controls, and instead, let's bring up the modulators. And when I bring this up, we get all of our options here. You can see that they've been sorted like so. And we're not going to go into these in this video because we're going to do individual videos on the majority of these. But for example, let's say I want macro control like I used to have before. Not a problem. I can bring in the macro 4, and now with the macro 4, I can set these up. So let's say that I want control over this. I want control over that. I want control over reverb mix. Okay, and I want to increase the release. All right, I can set that up, and now I can open this up, and we have that macro control set. And again, we could go into a bipolar mode if we wanted to do that. So now with this macro control, we can find our balance. And that's really all there is to the new modulation scheme. There are some really cool modulators in here, and obviously we will be going in much greater depth with basically all of these in subsequent videos. On now to the new devices, and of course we're going to have a lot of dedicated videos to these guys on their own, but just as an overview, I want to start again with a couple of modulators, specifically what's replaced the audio mod and the note mod, and those have been replaced with audio sidechain and note sidechain. So we're just going to set up a couple of simple examples so you can see how that's working. We'll begin with audio sidechain here. It's just the same as the audio mod. We'll choose our input source, and in this case, let's actually use group 2, which is going to be considered the drums in this example. So both the kick and the sort of clap snare thing will go out of the way. So we'll go in here and we're going to go drums, and we can choose drums master. Okay, we'll go drums master post. And now what we'll do is we're going to set a parameter that we want to be brought down. We can choose both gain, and also we can have the filter kind of cut a little bit. So let's do that. We'll have it just cut out this way. So we'll bring the gain down, and we'll also bring the filter frequency back. So you can also determine like what it's listening to, the monitoring. So if you have a signal and there's a lot of like low end in it, as there probably will be with this kick, we may not want all of that because it may trigger it too aggressively, but we can experiment and see. So let's give this a go here. You can hear how the kick is actually triggering that a little more aggressively. Right, so pretty straightforward. We could have this really controlling anything, and then we can set the depth of modulation here. So this might be a little bit too extreme, especially when that one kick comes in. So I might even go and like turn that one down so that it doesn't trigger as aggressively. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Nice. Let's add another effect on here. Maybe we'll add one of the new effects. Let's go with the phaser. And let's see if I can find that here. And you can see with the phaser, it already has an LFO built into it because it kind of needs it. That's how the phaser is working. It's taking the frequency and it's sweeping it around based on the number of poles that you have set up. So we'll just leave that alone. And instead, we're going to go in here and we're going to grab the note sidechain. All right. And we're going to choose our detune darkness here. And so this is going to now react to whatever we have this modulated to when these notes hit. So for example, we could go in here and have this control the mix, and then we can kind of set an envelope based on this. So we can have the attack kind of come in slowly. This will be interesting. We'll bring the sustain down and increase the release a little bit. And we'll just listen and hear how this works. Didn't really trigger that well on the first one for some reason. Oh, there it goes. Bring a little bit of this in to begin with. Yeah, so that's the way that those would work. It's pretty cool. It's self-explanatory. That's the replacement for your audio mod and your note mod. They're now called audio sidechain and note sidechain, respectively. We've already had a chance to look at this a little bit, but let's start with the phaser. And this is a great place to start because by default, it has an LFO built into it. So you can see that that's pulsing right along here. And this is the replacement for the LFO mod. There are other LFOs you can use, but this one is very similar to what we had before with the LFO mod. The phaser itself, it works by having a number of all-pass filters. So if you think about an all-pass filter, you'd have your low pass coming to here, and then you'd have your high pass coming up to here, so that most of the signal, pretty much all the signal, is still intact. And then you can set the number of poles to kind of make this effect more or less aggressive. So if we're listening, 2 poles actually works really well. And when you slow it down, it's more of like a chorus. We actually have additional controls, so if we want to take the right side and we can make that pitch a little higher, the left side, and when I say pitch, it also means frequency in this case, bring that down low. Really cool effect. And feedback is going to make it more phasey. And then we can hear what happens when we add in more poles. Densens up the sound, makes it a lot more digital. Whereas you go a little bit lower, it kind of has more of like that analog frequency shifter kind of vibe to it. We have the DC offset and the dual pan as a couple of utility devices. The DC offset you might be able to use in conjunction with like modular synthesizers, but typically in the realm of music production, DC offset is something you want to correct and take away, not add. But it can be cool for some distortion effects and even to get you some like organic like digital crackling. And I'll show you how you could do that. It's going to be kind of loud. I'll try to compensate in the editing afterwards, but when I bring this up, if we go really high, it's going to produce like a crackle. We could do this for the top or the bottom. The sound's not really going to change too much, but so that's kind of a cool effect. And I'm not really sure if you could achieve this any other way. I believe that there even is the DC offset parameter in the distortion device. And so it is sort of acting the same way. Like, how does the clip get, and this is a tough word because I'm going to use clipped in two different ways, but how does the audio file get clipped at the very top? And so we're going to look at that. I'll export it. And we can see what this looks like upon bounce. And in this case, we need to go post fader so that we make sure that we get all the distortion in there. Okay, so we can see if I go in here and I turn this off, go in here and then make sure that we turn this way down. You can see how all of the clip exists above that line. There's nothing coming below it. So if we were to flip it the other way, we'd get the offset in the other direction. So when we listen to this, we get this sort of crackly distortion. And this would be a good time to maybe look at and see what this looks like inside of the new spectrum analyzer. Because even I'm kind of curious to know. I wasn't planning to do this at this time, but why not? All right, we can bring that in. This might be a good time to increase the GUI scaling as well. So you can see that there's like a major aliasing issue here. There's a lot of low end in this. So if we were to use this as a distortion, we would need to make sure that we came in here and added in some kind of a filter beforehand, just to be safe. You can see that that's helped out considerably. And now you can see that the signal level is so much lower than it was before. It was peaking out because there was all of that low end in there that was way below audible level. So that's what you can do with the DC offset. I wasn't expecting to go that in depth at this point, but hey, why not? The other thing that's been brought in is the dual pan. And the dual pan is very much like the way that you would mix in Pro Tools when you have a stereo channel. You get control over each of those channels, left and right, independently. And now you have that kind of a panning control here inside of Bitwig Studio. This is probably the thing that you're going to use the most of all of the new devices. And I would recommend that you use it when you do have a stereo file, because you can get a lot more interesting results, especially when you couple it with the traditional panning that they have, which is just kind of relative. Because when you go all the way to the left, it just kind of turns it into a mono file and then puts it on the left. Here you get a lot more control, and I'll just let you listen to that here. So you can hear I'm taking the right channel and bringing it more towards the center, but keeping the left channel all the way in the left. And I could bring this back in, create something a little more mono. And then let's say I take that right channel and I bring that hard. That's not something that you could traditionally do. You'd have to use an additional plugin to kind of do that in here. But what I like is we could take it, get this sort of relative balance, and then go in and offset it even a little more. And so this will allow you to position your stereo channels and your stereo samples in many more ways. You'll be able to get different spots in the stereo field that you couldn't have accomplished with the traditional panning. The pitch shifter is a lot of fun and works exactly the way you'd expect it to. Such a cool effect. I love kind of like the smoothness to this one. It really has this unique sort of like vibe to it. I don't know how to explain it, but this is one I'm going to be using all the time, and especially combining with the modulators. Get some hard dissonance in here. Let's go to a 7 for a 5th. Should probably just double click it at a certain point. Listen how nice that sounds. And This would definitely be something to put into like a group track, so you have control over panning, and you could like pan one of these hard left, one of these hard right, maybe even combine it with the dual pan, and you could take this one single pad sound, and I'm sure we'll do this in a video coming up, and you could make it into this huge thing by just using the pitch shifter, the dual pan, and creating parallel layers. Last but not least, we have the Treemonster, which is some kind of like a ring modulator effect. There's not that many parameters on it, so you can kind of experiment on your own, but you'll see that when ring modulation is turned all the way down, what you actually start with is just a sine wave, and when you're at 100%, that's all we're going to hear once I bring the threshold down below the audio range here. So here we have a sine wave, and then we can increase the speed of modulation, decrease the pitch or increase the pitch. Let's decrease it so we don't blow our eardrums out. And now you'll hear what happens as we bring in the ring modulation amount. It's not just going to be a sine wave anymore, but it's going to be reacting to the signal. So finding kind of a balance can work really well in terms of getting a unique effect. And then obviously we could put in modulators here to control something like pitch or ring amount. And we have a couple of filters we can bring in too. That's kind of cool.